Can you hear what's going on?
Ladies and gentlemen, my guest for the third time is Dr. E. Michael Jones,
So
American.
You can't hear anything? You can't hear what's going on? All right. If you can't hear, there's no point. You can go upstairs and do what you got to do. The point here is, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No problem. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, cool. Dr. E. Michael Jones, my guest for the third time, American and Catholic, super intellectual. I wanted to have multiple guests today and make a live stream, but we couldn't make it today. We will make it some other day on StreamYard. Greg Johnson got ill. Tom Sunic is with his wife. Maybe he'll join us here later, but not very probable. Today's theme is paganism, ethnicity, and Christianity. Which is better for ethnicity is what European nations, and Europeans and Americans of European descent, what it's happening today to them. Is it because of Christianity? Would it be better for them to remain pagans and never have become Christians? Or this is what we will talk today with Dr. E. Michael Jones. Dr. E. Michael Jones, how well are you educated or acquainted with paganism? What does paganism mean to you?
Yeah, that's a good question because Christianity, in a sense, grew out of what we're calling paganism. And we're talking about paganism as if there's one generic paganism throughout the world. Okay, we'll make differentiations here because there are different ethnic groups, there are different civilizations, but we're saying in effect that anything outside of Christianity is paganism, and we're talking about that as if there's some type of unity there. Well, there is no unity there. There's no unity whatsoever in what we're talking about, neither geographically nor historically. So if you want to talk about an abstract principle of ethnicity, ethnicity is based on language. And we have groups that are called tribes, and a tribe is based on a language. They speak the common language. The common language is what unites them, and then next door there's another group, and that group is a different ethnic group who speaks a different language. The best place I think you can find this is in Africa right now. So you have Tanzania, which is a country that is made up of 76 different ethnic groups, and they all speak different languages. Race is completely irrelevant to this question because they're all, it's a racially homogeneous country. They're all black in some sense or other. There's really no difference there. This is true of Kenya, it's true of Uganda, it's true of all of Africa, basically. Sub-Saharan Africa is what we're talking about here. Okay, now, but what are we talking about historically? What are we talking about historically? We're talking about, if you're talking, viewing the history of ethnic groups, well, some ethnic groups are more important than others. What do I mean by that? Especially if you're talking about Christianity. We have two ethnic groups that are very important when it comes to Christianity, and one would be the Hebrews and the other would be the Greeks. Now, from our perspective, I think the Greeks are more interesting in this regard because they are purely an ethnic group. If you're talking about the Hebrews, you're talking about a group of people that were made special by God himself. Okay, this is the group of people that it's God's chosen people. He chose to instruct them face to face, pretty much. If you're talking about God talking to Moses and then Moses talking to the people, it's a special case. Let's talk about the Greeks. There was something extraordinary about the Greeks as an ethnic group. The extraordinary thing was not just that they had a language, but they did a lot of talking, and they did a lot of creative work in that language, and that language became a very important language in the history of the world. It was spread, we had the beginnings of the understanding of Logos. I just wrote a book called Logos Rising. I use that word because we cannot get away from the fact that we have to use that word because they were the only people that had that sophisticated understanding of reason, rationality, and so on and so forth. There was no other group in the world or in human history that had this sophisticated approach to ultimate reality. And I'm including the Hebrews here too, because the Hebrews were not a philosophical people. They were told, instructed by God in certain things. God told them, I am who am, when Moses asked to identify him. Well, he was talking about self-subsistent being. Well, they didn't understand that. They didn't have a concept of being. And so they just followed it to some extent. A lot of times they didn't follow it. So when Moses came down from the top of the mountain, they had completely abandoned this sophisticated understanding of God as self-subsistent being and were worshiping idols. And that in many ways is the whole history of the Hebrews. So let's put the Hebrews aside there and take the Greek. The Greeks were not chosen by God, but they had this idea of, for some reason or other, that they are going to come up with an understanding of everything. Everything. And it was called philosophy. And it began with Thales saying that everything was water. And then as time went on, they got more and more sophisticated in their understanding of ultimate reality. And it became less and less concrete and more abstract until finally we came across the idea of logos, that everything is logos. Now, if you want to talk about paganism, are you going to talk about that in the same breath as you're going to talk about, I don't know, some guy, some tribe in the middle of the Amazonian rainforest that's going to talk about some type of mumbo jumbo about one thing or another? You can't talk about it. They're not commensurate. And so when you say, what is the relationship between Christianity and paganism? Well, the first thing you'd have to talk about is the relationship between Christianity and Greece. So here we have the arrival of Christianity, the arrival of Jesus Christ, and you've got the chosen people decide they're going to kill their Messiah. And this is the beginning of the Jewish revolutionary spirit, which I describe in another book. But then after they kill their Messiah, they decide anyone who talks about him is going to be killed as well. And so St. Paul, a Jew, decides to come here and he wants to talk to the Jews in their synagogues. They expel him from the synagogue. And then he goes to the Greeks. And then he starts talking to Greeks. Now, this is what we're talking about here. He goes to the Areopagus in Athens. They are philosophers. He mistakes his audience. He thinks they're idol worshippers, as in Ephesus, where he just was. He gives the wrong speech, and it fails. And he leaves. Two people accept it, and everybody else just walks away. We'll talk about that some other time, they say, and they walk away. And so he goes to Corinth, and he has a better reception among sailors and whores than he had among philosophers. And I'm saying there was one man who understood this failure, and it was St. John. And I'm saying he wrote his gospel as in understanding the failure that Paul had speaking to Greeks. So all the three other gospels, it begins with genealogies. It's all based, geared toward the Hebrew people. The Gospel of Matthew begins with a long Hebrew genealogy that makes no sense to Greeks. They don't know who these people are. So John says, all right, we're going to have a different approach. And he adopts paganism, if you want to call it that way. If you want to talk about it that way, he adopts Greek philosophy. And he says, this is necessary. There was something here that was necessary as a part of human development before Jesus Christ could make his message known to people. So we had to have a certain kind of development here. And the church fully adopted the Greek language. It adopted the vocabulary of the Greek language, and it adopted terms like logos. So St. John says, in the beginning there was logos, and logos was with God, and logos is God. Now that shows that Christianity is receptive to what we're calling paganism. But there's no such thing. I mean, paganism, what does that mean? Does that mean they're going to be receptive to every single ethnicity? Oh, yes, they are. Does that mean they're going to adopt the mythology of every single ethnicity about Thor or about God knows what? There are a million different ethnic narratives. They all have some type of creation story that is basically metaphysically impossible. Hinduism and all those gods, there's an example of that there. The Hindu cosmos, the earth resting on 4 elephants and the elephants on a turtle. Well, that's good, but what's the turtle standing on? So you have this metaphysical incoherence, and you can't adopt that because it's incoherent. So what you're seeing here is the point here is not, I want a religion that's going to fit my needs. This is when I hear this type of paganism, we Norwegians, we need our own religion. It sounds like consumerism to me. I mean, I want a religion that fits my needs. Well, maybe you need a religion that fits God's needs, because you're eliminating this whole type of, first of all, a historical discussion about what was the interface between Christianity and Greek thought as a form of paganism, as opposed to every other thought. The Christianity can adapt itself to every ethnic group on the face of the earth, but that doesn't mean that they're going to adopt what is basically an inferior understanding of Logos. Why should they do that? And so I got into this discussion in Guadalajara with David Duke. And David, I don't know what he's talking about now, but he was talking about something. We white guys have to stick together. So you and I can tell by looking at you that you're a white guy. I can't talk to you because you speak Slovenian and I speak English. But we white guys, we have to stick together no matter what. And I'm saying, no, this is a misunderstanding of reality here. Okay? The point of the book, the title of the book is called Ethnos Needs Logos. So what you have is all of these individual ethnic groups. It's part of nature. Every bit as much as the family is part of nature, because you learn your language from your ethnic group. Christianity doesn't give you a new language. Your family doesn't give you the language. Your government, you get it from your ethnic group. Okay? And that means ethnos is part of nature, because that's part of what we are. As human beings, the main characteristic we have is language. The fact that we speak. That's what differentiates from all the animals. So, okay, so you get this. So obviously we have to have an ethnic group. But ethnos is not complete by itself, because you're just one group and you need some type of contact with universality, because that's what God is. So even that there's a God, does any ethnic group in the world think that God is only God to their ethnic group? No, they don't think that way. You've got your ethnic group, you've got your own personal gods, you worship these personal gods because you think they're going to help you out, but you understand that God is a father. And he lives in the sky, and he's the father of all of mankind. And so then the question arises, well, how do I relate with other people because there's a God? If there were only ethnic groups and there were no God, it's impossible, but if there were only ethnic groups, then you could say, well, my ethnic group is the only human beings. And other people, the word for that tribe over there is our word for rattlesnake, or cow dung, or the people of cow dung, or they're inhumans. The Greeks had a little bit of this because they referred to other people as barbarians, because they talk like ba, 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 and it doesn't make any sense. Okay? So this notion that you as your own ethnic group can have your own personal God is theologically preposterous. It's preposterous. And it came about at a particular moment in time. Let's talk about that moment in time in Scandinavia, for example. He's Norwegian. What happened in Scandinavia? Well, we had Christianity coming to there, 1,000 years ago. And then you had this disruptive effect called the Reformation. And the Reformation basically broke the unity of Christianity in Europe. It established state church based on looting. The deal was the same in every Protestant country. The aristocrats got church property, and they appointed a state church that would minister to their theft of property. That's what happened in England, Germany, Scotland, Scandinavia. It happened at the same place. Well, because they broke with the church, they eventually ran out of gas. And that's what happened here in Scandinavia after 500 years, basically. The churches died. They all died. During the beginning of the 21st century, Sweden abolished the whole notion of a state church. And now you have a vacuum. All of these Protestant countries, there is a tremendous spiritual vacuum. And people are looking around and they're thinking, what can I do to fill this spiritual vacuum? And I think this is why they are drawn to these preposterous fairy tales that nobody believed in the first place, about Thor and his hammer and all this other type of stuff. There's nothing there. There's no sophistication there. It's primitive. And it was superseded. Why do you think all of these people became Christians? Because they realized that there was a superior understanding of Logos, and that once you have that superior understanding, you can't go back. So this project is doomed to failure.
Could you articulate what they basically mean, but they're not aware of it? That it would be very nice if we imagine a hypothetical war between, I don't know, Jews and Norwegians, for example, or Jews and Germans, Jews and Norwegians. And Jews have this Superman called Baal, and Norwegians have this Superman called Thor, and those two Superman help to these ethnic groups in this war. They prefer their own ethnic groups, and what they basically mean is that it would be nice to have a superior Superman to help us in a hypothetical and physical war, but at the end you have to have a God, a father, with that is a standard to judge of whether us winning this war is just or not. Does this make sense?
Yes, you're right. You need God. Atheism is a psychological problem based on failed fathers that is being promoted by oligarchs because they want to control people. So that's why you have atheism being promoted. Science kind of helps along. Darwinism is part of it. Those 4 atheists that I discussed in my book, they're all part of this story. Okay, so you do need God, but you're pretending that no one ever thought about God before. I mean, God is not something that you kind of conjure up like a comic book hero. That's the problem here. You've got this loss of sophistication. It's a good analogy that you bring up when you talk about Superman, because that's exactly what these people are talking about. This is a fiction. It's not a reality. It's not a reality that corresponds to world history or anything else. You're not the first people who decided that God is important, that he exists, that he's important, that we need him, and so on and so forth. Lots of people have done this before, and all of these, because of what we know in terms of philosophy, you cannot just appoint anyone as your God. That's not what God is. So if you think he's Superman, you're mistaken. That's not what was going on here. It took a long time before anyone had a metaphysical or philosophical understanding of what God had to be if we're talking about God. And this too took place in Greece, because the beginning of Greek culture was Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. And if you look at the Iliad, this is classic mythology. What is mythology? Mythology is basically based on the understanding that obviously we need some type of God. I didn't create myself. This world did not create itself. Something else had to be some type of primal being we all intuit that it's a father. We have this fundamental understanding that the Father lives in heaven, and that's it. That's all. That's as far as we can go. And every ethnic group in the world had that intuition. Okay, there's no language in the world that doesn't have a word for God. Okay, and then at that point you start taking it along the way of your imagination, and that's where you start to go wrong. So if God is a father, well, he must have a beard, right? Well, does God have a beard? Well, no. I mean, we have to have some more sophisticated understanding. If he doesn't have a body, he doesn't have a beard. And if he doesn't have a body, he has to be a spirit. And how do we represent spirit? Well, that's difficult. So I was just reading Plotinus. And Plotinus said that Phidias came to his understanding of Zeus, the statue of Zeus, from his mind. Well, that's sort of true, but he had to have an idea of man. It was obviously an exalted man, and the man that he exalted had a beard because men have beards, right? Well, that's wrong. And the man who understood that it was wrong was Socrates, who basically wanted to stop Greeks from reading poetry, Homer in particular, because the gods they were deluding themselves. That's not what God is. God cannot do that. God cannot get jealous. God cannot become so overpowered with lust that he's going to fly down in the form of a bull and rape someone. That's not God. And if you think that's God, you're going to your morals will be corrupted because you'll probably end up raping someone. Socrates was the first one to understand it. Now, all of these people are acting as if they can order God from Amazon. Like Amazon sells everything, right? So let's go down the list. There must be a God that I can buy because why not? I want to buy. Well, this is crazy. You can't pretend that all of this has happened. You can't pretend that the Swedish people, the Scandinavian people didn't weigh Thor in the scales and find him wanting, because anybody who is sensible would do that. I mean, if you don't know, if you've never heard of Jesus Christ, if you've never heard of the Logos, if that's all it is and you're living in Iceland or someplace like that where there's no contact with anybody else, well, yeah, you do the best with what you can. But once you make contact with other people, you realize this is a faulty understanding of God and we can never go back. Well, this is what's driving this Norwegian Scandinavian nationalism in the vacuum that was created by the failure of Protestantism. They're thinking, well, if Protestantism failed, well, it must be Christianity that has failed. And then they come up with these elaborate rationalizations of why Christianity failed and why they can't move to real Christianity.
If I dig into if I speculate about the psychology behind neo-pagan anti-Christianity, it seems to me when I speak to these people that they think that God, because he's universal, does not prefer for groups to win wars, and this is for me a preposterous idea, as if God didn't have preference about morality, as in God didn't have sense about justice, for example. There has to be a certain justice about who wins the wars. Although wars are not good things, but when wars happen, there has to be some justice about them. And it seems to me that psychology behind their thinking is that a Christian God does not prefer anyone to win, even if it were more just for them to win. This seems to be the presupposition of their thinking.
They've been abandoned by their own government and by their own culture. This is what has happened in places like England. These are the people, the English people, the backbone of the English nation, are been demonized crazily. I don't know why, how this happened, but because they're white. Okay, and as soon as you're white, you're racist, and so therefore you're under suspicion. And this is this self type of demonization that is spreading throughout, this self-loathing that is spreading throughout all these formerly Protestant countries. It's hard to understand, but you have to. You're right in talking about the psychology of what's going on here. We're talking about a psychology of what happens when Christianity seems to have failed. The God That Failed, that was a book that came out of it. It was about communism, but it's a concept that is a common concept. What do you do when it seems that the God has failed? So people will write to me, and in response to Logos Rising, they will say, how can you say that you're a rational person if you talk about the Trinity? And then they come, I'm just accepting everything according to reason. That's all make-believe. I don't believe in make-believe and fairy tales. I'm just going to accept the facts. And so this guy then sends me a video of what he believes, and it's pure fantasy. It's pure Scandinavian nostalgic fantasy of, girls with blonde hair and braids dancing around. And he's going to explain to these people how they're going to get strong again. And all you white boys out there, start lifting weights. And then there's this big guy, he's lifting weights. Man, I'm going to get strong. This is stupid and it's primitive. Okay, I lift weights too. Look at it. Look what it's done to me. Do I look there's nothing wrong with lifting weights, but if you think you've got the plan and this is part of it, you're deluding yourself. You're living in a world of complete irrationality. And to throw a God into that as some type of justification for lifting weights, and what we're talking about here is hatred of Christianity. Okay, now, why do you hate Christianity as a person? Because you basically identify it with rules that prevent you from doing what you want to do, okay? I mean, Aldous Huxley talks about this in his book about ways and means. He wasn't talking about paganism. He was talking about communism. He said, people are attracted to communism because you don't have to follow the moral law and you can have sex with whomever you want. The same thing applies to paganism. You want a religion that suits your passions. And your passions may be anger or they may be lust, but you want a God that's going to pat you on the back and tell you that what you're doing is okay. That's not what God is. And it's not the God that created the cultures that these people are trying to save either. It's not going to work. It's doomed to failure.
The problems of America and the problems of Scandinavia and the problems of Europe, it does seem that in America, whoever is behind this protest, this looting, this killing of people, of cops, of police officers, it seems that these people don't care about the language. They just care about the color of the skin, for example. It does seem that there is a plan or ideology that has turned against the so-called whites, the people of
Yes.
European descent. This is some sort of a fact, and probably these people think of how to solve this problem, because this is a big problem, and this is a problem that at least prima facie implies that whites, people of European descent, have to get together, at least prima facie. But what is your proposal? How to solve this really big problem that America has?
Yes. The problem I've talked about before is identity theft. Okay, we have a culture that's based on identity theft, or you could look at the opposite side and you could say it's identity politics. Identity politics and identity theft are the same thing. So identity politics means that you grant it's a false identity. You grant this false identity to people and they will have privileges. And identity theft is basically you deprive these people of their identity and you will be demonized. And so that's what's happening. So you're right. It's functioning according to a racial narrative in America. So Black Lives Matter has privilege, and white people are all racist, and therefore they have no rights. That's the paradigm that's trying to be imposed on America. It's not what this is really about. So the best example I can give is what happened in St. Louis. St. Louis, city in Missouri. Okay, somebody who claims to be a Muslim, turns out he's a white boy, started out life with his grandparents who were Southern Baptists taking him to church, claims to be a Muslim now, says that everyone is offended by the statue of St. Louis in St. Louis. King Louis IX of St. Louis. He's also a saint. Mm. Well, why are people offended by St. Louis? You mean, and then he's saying Black Lives Matter is supporting him. Well, why are black people offended by St. Louis? What did he ever do to them? He lived in the 13th century. He didn't even know that there were Negroes. I'm sure he did, but I mean, they had nothing to do with France. There were no black slaves in France at this time, no cotton plantations. So what's going on here? Well, it turns out that the big thing that St. Louis did was he burned the Talmud. Well, wait a minute. Do you mean that black people are upset because someone burned the Talmud in the 13th century? Do black people know what the Talmud is? Well, no. So what's going on here? What's going on here is the Jews are promoting this. And this man is a proxy warrior for the Jews, in particular, Rabbi Susan Talva, who is the head of a synagogue in St. Louis. And then the more you look into it, the more you realize, well, that's really what's going on in America, because George Soros, the Hungarian Jew, gave Black Lives Matter $33 million 5 years ago during the riots in Ferguson, where this whole Black Lives Matter thing started. So it's really not about black and white. It's really about a group that wants to start a revolution, and in America, the fundamental fault line is race. And if you can exacerbate that, then you may succeed with your revolution. Now, it turns out that Umar Lee will tweet things like, there are white supremacists at the statue. The white supremacists are descending the statue. Well, do you know what the white supremacists are doing? They're praying the rosary. Well, do white supremacists pray the rosary? No, it turns out that they're Catholics. Well, why are you calling them white supremacists when they consider themselves Catholic? Because if you impose the white identity on them, they lose. Because white people are always racist. And so what you're seeing here is an attempt to impose a narrative on this that doesn't fit. You're trying to impose a black and white narrative on what is basically a Catholic-Jewish conflict. Because you can't win if it's a Catholic-Jewish conflict. And I think we proved that in St. Louis. Because I wrote the article exposing this, okay, within hours of the article going up on the internet, Umar Lee challenges me to a debate. He debated, and I think he lost. And the reason I say he lost is because the statue is still there. That whole thing dissolved as soon as you exposed the identity theft that was at the heart of it. And I think the same thing is true of the revolutionary movement in the United States. And I think it has applicability to the identity theft that is going on in these Scandinavian countries. You have to expose what's going on and expose this racial narrative as a political manipulation.
What is the future? How to resolve this? I wanted to ask you this one question. Did you see that video of a white guy? There was a white guy protesting with Black Lives Matter, and then a black person wants to attack him, and he says, all white, Caucasian, or whatever, and he says, "Oh, I'm not white, I'm Jewish."
Well, he's right. You're not white. You are. That's good. He understands exactly what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm talking about. You know, and so, oh, wait a minute. Oh, you're Jewish. Well, I can't beat you up then, can I? This is something This is exactly what's going on in the United States right now, and mutatis mutandis is going on in Europe as well. So you're all of these people, these European peoples, are victims of identity theft. And once you deprive them of their identity, you deprive them of their ethnicity, then you can colonize them. And then they react by saying, no, I'm white. You're adopting the commands of your oppressors. But when the Jew is threatened, he says, hey, I'm not white. He's white because if there is no white privilege, but there certainly is Jewish privilege. And if you talk about Jewish privilege, you will get banned, which I found out personally. One of my best-selling books on Amazon Kindle was Jewish privilege. And that's what got me banned from Amazon privilege. So you see what's going on here. You cannot understand what's going on in the world right now unless you have a concept like the Jewish revolutionary spirit, because that's the driving force behind both Antifa and Black Lives Matter. The Jews, there are not enough Jews to do anything. That's why they always need proxy warriors, and the Jewish revolutionary spirit is how you control people and motivate them to do what you want. And that's what's going on.
I have to tell you about my own anecdote. This week or a week ago or 10 days ago, we had a debate on Twitter about Holocaust, and basically it was about Hitler coming to Maribor, my own town, and supposedly saying, make this country German again, which was then shown not to be true. But what I wanted to say in that debate is that I'm sick and tired of Holocaust deniers and hysterical anti-deniers. What I said was we need to set up some standards, optimal standards for historical evidence, whatever that is. Of course, historical evidence cannot be as standards for historical evidence cannot be as high as for physics, for example, but still you have to have optimal standards for evidence. And I said, let's set up some standards, and then let's set up a debate, and then historically educated people can come and put evidence on the table, and then we will have some material stuff to show to Holocaust deniers, and we can educate people of what is the evidence about that Holocaust happened. And then a journalist of a supposedly right-wing magazine called Reporter, his name is Nenad Glux. I don't know whether he's Jewish or not, but he
doesn't sound like a Slovenian name to me.
Nenad is a Croatian-Serbian name, but Glux sounds German.
It's German.
So
it sounds Jewish to me.
It could be Jewish, but I'm not sure if he's Jewish. And he wrote an article where he writes that my party, which is a mainstream conservative right-wing party in Slovenia, SDS, and my media, where I work as a journalist, which is Nova 24 TV, which is also a mainstream right-wing media, they should just fire me. And that he will write to the Israel embassy on Vienna, right, because I'm a Holocaust denier. Right. And what I said was basically just let's put some evidence on the table, and let's put an end to this hysteria. And this is all this is an anecdote I wanted to tell you.
Right.
It was funny.
Holocaust denial was created by a professor at Emory University called Deborah Lipstadt. She created this for political purposes. It's similar to the term hate speech, which was created by the ADL. The purpose of both of these things is to shut down discussion immediately and forever. by threatening the livelihood of anyone who they can put that label on. So that's what you're dealing with now. The Jew no longer debates. He no longer discusses anything. He calls you an anti-Semite and then tries to get you fired from your job. That is the problem that we're dealing with right now. You cannot talk to people like this. You cannot talk to people like this. Obviously, there should be some type of ability to do historical research in this area, but it's now against the law, largely because of Jewish pressure creating hate speech laws or Holocaust denial laws and so on and so forth. This has become intolerable, and it's got to change, because if it doesn't change, it will lead to violence. And the Jews are the people who will suffer from the violence.
Yeah. For example, Communist Party in Slovenia and ex-Yugoslavia made many massive murders after the World War II of Slovene intelligentsia, Slovene priests, and so forth. One of the commentators asked me, so what are you saying? That after the World War, massive murders didn't happen? I said, no, I believe they happened, but I'm open to debate. Of course, I'm open to debate. We can debate of whether historical events happened or not. This is not part of my identity.
No, you have a situation where Deborah Lipstadt is the chair of Holocaust Studies at Emory University, and all she's produced are 2 books on David Irving, her trial with David Irving. Where is the scholarship here? Where is the evidence? I'll give you one more instance of this. We published a French professor at another university in Georgia, wrote an article on Elie Wiesel, based on research of the whole connection between him and the French reversion and all this other type, all the scholarship was involved in it, and basically claims that Elie Wiesel did not write the book because of the disparities between the Yiddish and the French version, okay? Now, Deborah Lipstadt immediately jumped in because the ADL gets copies of Culture Wars magazine, and they are our most faithful subscribers, and we never have to send them a second subscription notice. There are people who are paid there to read this magazine. As soon as they saw the Elie Wiesel article and the fact that this man was a professor at another institution in Georgia, they called up Debbie Lipstadt. And Debbie Lipstadt then went to the president of the university and said, this man has to be fired. And the president is taken aback. Well, no, we'll have an investigation first. So he blocks that attempt. The investigation completely clears this professor of any type of charge that she raised. But that doesn't change the fact that she has the power to come in and destroy your life, depending on the moral fiber of the people who are there running the institution. This is an intolerable situation. No one in history should be able, this has never happened in history before because the Jews have never had this power before. But it's completely an intolerable situation. And if we are interested in protecting freedom and standing up to tyranny, we have to talk about it. If we don't, it will get worse.
Yeah, of course, we're not saying that it was great for Nazis to kill so many Jews. We're not saying it would be great for them to kill another 6 million. We're not saying this was great at all. We're not saying violence is great, wars are great. Nothing of that. We're just trying to debate historical events and the influence of Jews as we're talking about the influence of Anglo-Saxons, Serbs in Slovenia, and so forth and so forth. Yet we get accused of hatred towards Jews. This is
right. Yeah, all I'm saying is if Professor Lipstadt knows the story, why hasn't she written the book on it? Where is your book, Professor? Don't you want to contribute to historical research, or is it basically, let's get real here, let's talk about the actual situation. You're not a scholar, you're a commissar. And your job is to if the army isn't following party orders, you take the person out and you shoot them. And that spreads terror throughout the army. This is what you are. You're not a scholar. And then the question is, well, where is Jewish scholarship? They control institutions like Harvard. What did they produce there? Goldhagen's book? This is a joke. This is not scholarship. This is thought control. This is mind control. This is not. These people have no business having positions at a university when this is what they do.
Yeah, this has become preposterous. The doubt, the logos that is in the center of our civilization is now a you're being accused of being violent and hateful towards people because you use logos. This has no sense at all.
No, it doesn't. But I mean, let's get back to our original problem here. What about, are Jews white? Well, they are when it suits them. You came up with the classic example. The guy shows up at the Black Lives Matter rally, and he's a white guy until somebody's threatened to beat him up, and he says, wait, stop, I'm Jewish. Well, is that what's going on here? I think that is what's going on here. Because the Jews in America, beginning with the ADL, beginning with the Leo Frank lynching, have been trying to create race war in the United States for over 70 years now.
I was wondering whether this would have a same effect if the guy told the black attacker, "No, I'm not white. I'm Catholic."
No, because there's no such thing as Catholic privilege.
Yeah.
But there is Jewish privilege. But I mean, in a sense, that's what I said. That's what stopped. That's what preserved the statue in St. Louis. Because basically I had to articulate this point because the Catholics weren't saying anything in this regard. They weren't getting to the heart of the matter. And so none of the Catholics stood up and said, I'm white. And as a result, I'm sorry, I'm not white, I'm Catholic. And that they were being led down into a trap because they simply could not articulate the issue because of the current paralysis in the church about dealing with Jews. Catholic-Jewish dialogue has basically crippled the Catholic Church in making any critique of Jewish behavior. It's simply all, the Catholics have internalized the commands of their oppressors, and they consider it anti-Semitism now to criticize Jews. That's part of the problem.
Well, are you optimistic about the future? What are the alliances Catholics that are aware of this problem can make?
Well, first of all, they have to reject identity theft. That's the whole point here. You cannot go along with this notion of identity theft. You can't allow these other people to impose their identity on you. Can't allow that. And the problem here is, again, we're talking about deracination here. Okay, if you just grow up as an average guy and you don't understand what's going on, and then you're confronted by this aggressive orchestration of race, which George Soros is doing with Black Lives Matter, you might tend to think, well, I'm not that, I'm the opposite, I'm white. And as soon as you do that, you fall into a trap. Because you have no idea. First of all, it's not what your identity is. You know, I mean, in Chicago, when the battle came down over Marquette Park, they were, the people who were throwing rocks were accused of being white, but they were Lithuanians. The reason they lived there was because it was a Lithuanian neighborhood. Are Lithuanians white? Well, they become white as soon as they go to Chicago. They become white as soon as the black people start moving into their neighborhood. It's a natural reaction, but it's exactly, they know that, the smart people know that, and they're orchestrating this as a way of winning this culture war.
How strong is becoming this culture war? Are there many people okay, I'm sure there are not many people as you, but are the numbers of self-aware Catholics becoming bigger or not in America, for example?
Yes, Logos is rising.
This is a great thing to
The consciousness
hear.
is rising, but there's a consciousness that things were wrong, and then there's the consciousness of, well, what can I do? And oftentimes you end up being part of the problem in another way because you don't understand the real dynamics of what's going on. And the main thing that is blocking the emergence of Catholic identity is this Catholic Jewish dialogue. You have to understand who is opposing you. If you can't understand that, then you can't propose any type of solution to the problem, and that is being deliberately prohibited. You have to struggle with the Catholic audience to talk about the real source of the problem. I'll give you an example. Just recently, yesterday, as a matter of fact, Newt Gingrich is the speaker, a former Speaker of the House, Republican, significant member of the Republican Party. He's commenting on Fox News, and he starts off by saying, the problem with the riots is you have prosecutors in these cities who have been appointed with George Soros money. And George Soros is using this money and as soon as the police arrest people, the prosecutors let them go, and so they're never going to solve that problem. He is interrupted by the two women he's talking to, and they say, sorry, you cannot say the word George Soros.
On Fox 3.
Yeah, on Fox News. And so you should look this up. You could probably find it. It's a short segment. Look at the expression on Newt Gingrich's face. He's shocked. Now, this is a man you would think who would know the rules of speech, of public speech and discourse. And now we've reached this taboo has now reached, you can't even talk about George Soros. Well, if you can't talk about George Soros, you can't talk about the prosecutors that were appointed with his money. And if you can't talk about that, you can't talk about why the rioters don't get arrested. So you can't talk about the problem. This is precisely the issue. Can we talk about what's happening or not? We have to break this taboo because we can't explain what's happening unless we do.
Yeah, I don't know if we spoke about this in our last conversation. I had a conversation with a director of a Maribor synagogue, which is a cultural center today. It's not a real synagogue anymore. It's not a religious, it's not a church anymore. But I spoke to him, and later on I read his interview with a local newspaper, and they asked him of whether the cultural center, the Maribor synagogue, was subsidized by George Soros, and he said somewhat laughingly, no, we're not subsidized by George Soros. This is like a conspiracy theory. People think that George Soros is all around them and so forth. And then he went on to tell who is subsidizing them, and he said the local principality is subsidizing us and the Rothschild Foundation.
Okay, so it was a different Jew. Okay.
It was a different Jew, probably the greater Jew or whatever, but he thought of the George Soros question as a conspiracy theory, and then he went on to create an even bigger, a wider conspiracy theory himself, with admitting that they were sponsored or subsidized by a Jewish foundation.
Yeah, so here we're not allowed to talk about it, and if we can't talk about it, we can't resolve the issue, and that's precisely why you're not allowed to talk about it. So we have to break this taboo. But I mean, to get back to the original topic, what are we talking about here when we talk about paganism? Let's talk about Tom Sunic. I wish he were here to explain, talk to himself, because I've often thought about him as the classic example of someone who was born a Croatian and ended up being a white guy at some point or other. Now, I don't think the black, was there black migration into Zagreb or something like that I missed? I think Tom was influenced by Nietzsche. And I think once you get into this, you're talking about just anti-Christianity, hatred of Christianity, but not only that, hatred of Logos as well. I mean, Nietzsche was very explicit about hating both Christ and Socrates, because I think he saw the connection, and there is a connection. He's right in seeing that. But I think this is one of these neo-pagan fantasies, because Nietzsche is going to release you from this oppressive religion that tells you what you need to do in order to be saved. I don't see anything more than that. I mean, is there a great god of the Croats that I'm missing? Who is the Croat Thor? Is there such a thing?
Oh.
Am I missing that?
Dr. Jones, I think that Tom Sunic is here with us. Dr. Sunic.
Can you see me, guys? I'm ready.
Yeah, it was a great luck. Dr. E. Michael Jones and I were just talking about you, and I read an email you sent me, and now you can both articulate your questions to each other. Dr. Jones, could you repeat the?
Yes, Tom, we talked years ago and haven't talked since. I was looking forward to seeing you in Zagreb, but that didn't happen. But we're talking about the... Can you hear me?
I can hear you well. Can you guys see me, and can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I can't see you.
Yeah.
Well, let's see with this camera thing. I don't know how that works exactly. I guess it should work, though. I guess you don't have to look at my pumpkin anyway, but I was just wondering if you can see me, and you can hear me well, right?
Yes,
yeah.
No problem.
Okay, guys, let's just first I got to apologize. Please do accept my apologies, Aleš, and Michael, yourself as well. I was trying, in fact, to get a hold of you both about half an hour ago, and I was just following the instructions that were laid out by Aleš in his email, but for some reasons I couldn't get a hold of you. Anyway, first and foremost, I don't want to, guys, flatter you too much, but I'm very pleased indeed, Michael, that you're on the show. And I have to extend my best greetings to all of you. And I'm really very sorry that we didn't catch up this May. We're supposed to have a big lecture downtown here in Zagreb.
Right.
It was all set up. It was very well prepared by some good colleagues of mine, including my colleagues from Denmark and from Sweden, but for a variety of reasons, and I'm sure you know which, especially this COVID hoax or whatever you want to call it, it was canceled. And I'm very, very pleased to retouch base with you again. And hope once in a while we'll, I guess next time it will work out better. And I'm really looking forward to seeing you in Zagreb. Anyway, guys, I'm at your service. And if you have some questions, I'll be more than pleased to. I probably don't look very formal because I don't have a tie like Michael and the rest of the crowd. Aleš, for your information, again, I know Michael very well. In fact, I did read his stuff, his books quite extensively. And I can tell you he's a man of... Anyway, I'm not his Sherpa, as they say. I'm not his spokesman, but he's a man of great erudition, of great capacity as well, of many, many skills. And what I specifically like about his prose is that he doesn't just focus on one topic. He had a book very well written on the music in the United States of America, and tonal music. And he also, of course, he deals with the Jewish question from his own perspective. Of course, there are certain differences we have, but I still do consider him a great scholar, and I'm really sorry that he is not more visible nowadays in the mainstream media in the United States. I guess, guys, I don't want to rap and rant, but if you have specific questions to ask me, I certainly would be pleased to address it.
Well, we're trying to address the issue of paganism, the resurgence of paganism. And I don't know where you came in on the discussion, but we had a long discussion about, the Greek roots of Christianity and so on and so forth. And I'm trying to situate this in Scandinavian countries with the collapse of Protestantism. these people have, this is the God that failed them, and they're throwing out the baby with the bathwater by throwing out Christianity by associating with that state religion that just expired in Sweden and places like that. And I'm saying that you can't go back. That's what I'm saying. I mean, you can't pretend that 2,000 years of investigation about what God is and what his nature is, and then pretend that you can create some type of ethnic Superman that's going to play the role that, like Thor, like a comic book figure, that's going to organize your culture for you. I'm saying you can't go back to that. So that's sort of the discussion we've been having.
So as I understand, Michael, you are basically implicitly you are suggesting that that this pagan reenactment falls short of caricature. Am I correct?
Well, I'm asking you: am I giving a caricature? I mean, what do you mean by paganism? Or let me get back to this question I've asked before: are you white or are you Croatian? This is the question I've been wanting to ask you for. I would have asked you in Zagreb if we had been there.
Well, I guess, listen, we can of course address the issue of paganism, but we got to first agree on the choice of words, on the choice of locutions, or rather on the choice of concepts, because it is certainly, I'm sure you're aware of it, and I've written about this quite extensively. The word itself, paganism, has a rather pejorative and negative connotation, be it in English or in Slovenian, in Croatian, and in German. And it has a paganos, back in the ancient Greece and back in the ancient Rome, it certainly didn't have such a derogatory connotation. But nowadays, it has a somewhat derisive, in fact, a negative connotation, which is partly due to the Christian propaganda. In fact, Christian propaganda, be it for good or for bad. But I guess if we just look at the etymology of the word paganos, it doesn't have a etymology of the word, it doesn't have a negative connotation. Now, let's leave aside now the New Age and all those, I call them Mickey Mouse neo-pagans that spring up and that pop up in Europe, and I don't consider those folks seriously. For instance, when somebody's asked me, let's say in a derogatory fashion, Mr. Sunic or Tom, are you a pagan? Then I ask him, what do you mean by that? If you want to put me in the same category with Cicerone or with Seneca, or for that matter even with Plato to some extent, then I can say, yes, of course I'm a pagan, because I'm proud of my heritage, and of course my heritage did not only start Anno Domini #1 with the birth of Jesus Christ. My heritage goes back thousands and thousands of years, even before or even prior to the rise of Christianity. So I guess this is a very, very complicated topic, but unless we first and foremost define the words and agree upon the words, I guess we'll just turn in circles.
Right, that's the problem, because you missed the beginning of the discussion where I talked about exactly that. I did go back to Greece and I talked about the whole development of logos, a completely unique development in all of human history. And to talk about, you're right, paganism is a negative term. It was imposed by Christians on people that were outside of Christianity. And it has no meaning, in a sense, if by pagan you mean there's some equivalence between what happened in Greece in the 4th century BC and what happened in a tribe in the Amazonian rainforest. They would both be considered pagans, but Christianity was, I talked about this earlier, I'm repeating myself, but Christianity, in a sense, adopted paganism. It adopted the Greek language, if that's what you want to talk about. It adopted, and when you adopt the Greek language, it adopted Greek concepts like logos. St. John did this. It was an appropriation of something that obviously was of value. And so there is no, in many ways, antithetical relationship between Christianity and paganism, if that's what you're talking about. Now, it didn't adopt everything. It didn't adopt the concept of Zeus as as God. It had a more sophisticated development, understanding of that. And the point of what I'm trying to make here is that there was a development here. It did take paganism. It did take Greek philosophy, and it developed it. It brought it to a higher level. And there are certain people who simply do not accept that level. And I've been dealing with them in their responses to Logos Rising. People are reading the book and they're writing back to me and they say, well, if you believe in reason, I believe in reason too. But when you talk about the Trinity, that's irrational. And I don't believe in fairy tales. So we're talking about a transition that took place at this period of time. And the sophistication that you found in Greece was not found among my ancestors, my German ancestors. They didn't have it. It just wasn't there. There's only one group of people in the world that were Greeks, that were that sophisticated, and they were the Greeks. The only other competing force was the Hebrews, and they had a completely different attitude, and Christianity was a kind of synthesis. So the point I'm trying to make here is I understand the crisis that the world is going through right now. There's a European crisis. I'm saying that identity theft is at the heart of it. And I think that as a result of this, people fall back and they try to create a God that's going to ensure their identity. And in doing that, they're going to fail.
Yes, I'm glad that you brought up this point. In fact, if I can just make a little historical detour, and I'm sure we will agree on that point. Look, of course, Christianity, or the early Christianity in the 1st century, the 2nd and 3rd century is quite different from the Christianity in the Middle Ages, let alone afterwards. We have what we have after the Vatican II Council in 1965. And this the Catholic Church itself, for instance, or Christianity overall, has a different thrust, if I can use that word, than, let's say, 2,000 years ago. But just for our information, probably for the information of our listeners, I guess I hope we'll agree, but we can disagree, of course. Now, let's keep in mind also that the ancient Romans in the 1st century during Theodosius, and later on by the end, Decius as well, until the 2nd century, the ancient Romans could not distinguish, and here this is something I want to emphasize, they could not distinguish between early Christos, early Christians, and Judeos, and Jews. So they all lumped them together into one block. And of course, they didn't have a very high opinion of them, to start with. So it was only in the 2nd century of our epoch that this distinction became more salient. And again, I'm not going to talk now about the pros and cons of specifically Catholicism as opposed to Protestantism and different Protestant sects. But the fact of the matter is, yes, indeed, I was born a Catholic, and I consider Catholicism not just a faith, not just a belief. Catholicism is also civilization. So in this sense, yes, if I can speak in my own name, I guess I'm proud of being a Catholic in the sense that I'm glad. Again, here is a paradox of history. What makes, in a sense, all Catholicism prior to the Vatican II Council, what makes it acceptable, what made it acceptable and made it to some extent also lovable, is the fact that the Catholics or Catholic Church has adopted or had adopted many of those pagan, under quotation marks, customs. Unlike, let's say, Protestantism, let alone Jews, the Jews are horrified with imagery. They don't like it. Even their sense of the mystery, even their sense of transcendence is completely different than ours. So I guess we have to agree upon that, and I hope, Michael, we agree on that thanks to, let's say, early Benedictines in the 8th century, thanks to also Dominicans, we actually, another paradox of history, we have the big pagan Greek authors were translated into Latin language. They were the ones, can you imagine, the monotheist Catholics, the monotheist Christian monks in Ireland and in England, they were the ones who translated first in the 8th and 9th century the pagan authors. So once again, if I can just simplify it a little bit, Catholicism, unlike other Christian denomination, certainly has a certain beauty. It has a certain especially in terms of aesthetics. And anyway, it's a very hard, it's a very large topic, and I guess we could go on and on. But let us again keep in mind, and I'll repeat once again, probably I'm repeating too much, until the 1st century, the early Romans, they could not tell the difference between the Jewish sect, which was Christians. It was basically all Jews. The early Christians in Judea or in Palestine were mostly Jews, and even in Rome later on. And it was only in the 2nd century that this distinction became more salient.
Yes.
Yeah. I wanted to ask a question about Nietzsche. Do you, Dr. Sunic, consider the critique of Christianity from Nietzsche a good one, a solid one, or is he? And then a question to you, Dr. Jones, too. Or is he guilty of presenting a micro brand of Christianity as a Christianity as a whole, for example? Does his critique of Christianity even stand against the Catholicism up until the Second Vatican Council?
Go ahead, Michael.
Well, I've already talked about Nietzsche. I mean, his hatred of logos is so overpowering that whatever critique he has is invalidated by it. And I see Nietzsche as a sophisticated version of the endorsement of paganism, probably in the Christian sense, because I think he saw it as the antithesis of Christianity, when we've just begun discussing how it is not, in a sense, the antithesis of Christianity. The real Greek, the thrust of Greek philosophy found its culmination in Christianity, not its negation. And that is clearly not the narrative that Nietzsche is talking about. Nietzsche was influenced, I think, more by the Bacchae, by his reading of the Bacchae. There's a passage in there talking about this. I think if you want to understand the attraction of Nietzsche, you could go to something like Thomas Mann's book, Death in Venice, because we have in Thomas Mann a great piece of German prose, but one of the a description of the Dionysian orgy, the Dionysian festival, which he took from Nietzsche, from Nietzsche's valorization of that. So what you're seeing here with Nietzsche is not the valorization of Greek culture. You're seeing is the weaponization of Greek culture as a club with which you can beat Christianity over the head. I think that's what he was doing, and it's the antithesis of what we discussed about St. John's relationship with the whole tradition of Logos in Greek philosophy.
Well, I agree with you. And listen, it's again, it's a very heavy topic. I must say. Oh yes, I can say I'm a fan of Nietzsche. I've read him thoroughly, and let me just backpedal for a second. I have my own saying that before you read a philosopher, or before you read a historian, of course, before a historian, you gotta before you read history or before you read philosophy, you gotta know who is the historian, who interprets, who is the interpreter of that particular historical or philosophical event. Look, one thing I'm in disagreement with Nietzsche is that there are many Nietzscheans who are on the left who are certainly not my friends. But by all means, I certainly agree with Nietzsche, and I've read his Antichrist on many occasions. Even some of the words he coined, like moralin, which is now ironically quite common in the French language, but it's das Moralin, it doesn't exist in the German language, although the translation, which was done by Mencken, yes, I think he wrote a good translation of Antichrist. Again, I'm sort of spreading out too much. I just want to say, yes, I fully agree with him, and in fact, I grew up with him, so to speak, and I guess he influenced me very much. Although in terms of his prose, sometimes he does sound a little bit pathetic. I'm not too much fond of elliptic sentences in his prose, and sometimes too disconnected. I wish he was a little bit more, quote unquote, sober when he was writing some of his prose. By the by, I'm having a lecture now on Nietzsche and virtue signaling. I should be in Finland 3 weeks from now, and I have a topic with some European nationalists. Some of them you know very well. And my lecture is on Nietzsche and virtue signaling, and I guess he did an amazing job, an amazing, how can I say, an amazing his work in terms of discarding this false morality, or rather hypermorality. It's another nice expression I like very much, hypermoral, which exists in the German language, hypermorality, which is part and parcel of all postmodern, let's say, age, and especially of all political class and all those virtue signalers and let's call them social justice warriors. And I specifically refer here to Dems and Antifas. You know, they like moralizing about everything, how bad we are, how fascist we are, how anti-Semites we are. So I guess Nietzsche was at least, you know, I guess Michael at least will agree on that point, that Nietzsche was great in terms of discarding this false morality, which is nowadays the major veneer, the major luster, so to speak, of all, I call them world improvers. The Germans have a nice expression, Weltverbesserer, world improvers, and I mean specifically, we can mention them, Nancy Pelosi, Adam Schiff, and whatever those guys are, Schiff the Schiffs, and now basically, well, behind those riots in the United States of America and elsewhere in Europe. So I guess we got to give Nietzsche some credit. As far as his criticism of Jesus Christ and as far as his criticism of theology, of Christian theologies, well, I guess, Michael, let's be honest, it pretty much depends on someone's character. I was raised in a very strong Catholic family. I mean, I got 2 Jesuits in my distant family. I got a couple of Franciscans as well. My dad was a devout Catholic lawyer. But I myself, by my temperament, probably I inherited it from my mom. I'm a little bit rebellious. I have this, quote unquote, this pagan type of a proclivity and this inclination towards questioning myself every day, let alone on an institutional level, and I hope that we'll agree with that. I'm totally opposed to the Vatican now, to what they're doing, and I don't like this Pope. I think he's a very bad news over the last couple of years, and I'm not happy with what the bishops, what they call the Bishops' Conference in the United States of America, let alone in Germany. This is disastrous. They're worse than Frau Merkel because they're the ones who actually bring in the foreigners inside. So I guess we could go on and actually discuss quite explicitly about this bad offshoot of the Catholic Church over the last 20, 30 years, and specifically since the Vatican II Council. And I'm sure we're on the same page as far as this portion of all discussion is concerned.
Yes, it's we've been we should have been in this from the beginning, you know, because
right. Sorry about this.
And we should have been able to discuss this in Zagreb as well, because there's a lot that needs to be discussed here. And the problem is I have to go at this point, but I just would like to state what I've already said here. When it came, we're in the middle of a revolution, right, in the United States of America. And the beginning of it is iconoclasm, the tearing down of statues. And when it came to St. Louis, you had 2 competing identities there. There was the Catholic identity and there was the white identity. And the whole point of the revolutionary movement was to impose this white identity on this group of Catholics to deprive them of their rights. This is identity theft. And this is the crucial issue right now. And I'm saying that what happened in St. Louis, that statue is still standing because we thwarted their attempted identity theft. The whole racial narrative in the United States of America is being paid for by George Soros, and it's being supported by 600 Jewish organizations have endorsed Black Lives Matter, because the Jewish revolutionary spirit has been trying to create race war in the United States of America for over 100 years now.
I agree with that. Michael, let me just, I'm sorry for interrupting you, for breaking in. Let me just make this distinction. I'm not quite sure that I understood it very well. Are you making an opposition between whites and Christians, or are you actually considering...
Yes, I'm saying there are two competing...
Can you be a little bit more explicit on that? So basically, you're suggesting that all whites are also anti-Christians, which, to my understanding, it's not true, because some of my best friends in the States are both whites, but they're also very Catholic, very Christians.
Right. We're talking about, it's clear in St. Louis, that's the reason I bring it up, that white and Catholic are two competing identities. If you go to, and I'm talking about in America, the idea of the triple melting pot, which was basically the ethnic understanding of America. There are three ethnic groups in America based on three religions: Protestant, Catholic, and Jew. America is like Yugoslavia, three ethnic groups based on three religions. And what we're seeing here is an attempt to impose the racial narrative on that fact, on the ethnic identity of America, as a way of weaponizing race and defeating defeating the majority of the American people, and imposing this racial tyranny on them.
Well, as far as your comments about Soros, as far as your comments about ADL, let's say SPLC, are concerned, I'm fully in agreement with that. I understand what their narrative is. I know very well. I'm also on their list. But the point that I'm still a little bit unsure, and I'm not sure, I'm probably misunderstanding something. Once again, I know quite a few of people who define themselves in terms of their ethnicity. I prefer the word race because, look, ethnicity has become a very generic word. It can cover everything. And I prefer the word race, despite the fact that the word race, the locution rate, has been so much demonized. So it has, by the by, it disappeared from the French Constitution a couple of years back. It was simply race, the word race. It's no longer considered valid. It's considered like a social construct, whatever, which is not, in my view. I consider it quite sincere, a very valid segment in my identity. Now, whites, okay, I consider myself white, and I'm proud of being white, although I don't have to cry and shill and shriek outside like some stupid nationalists, white nationalists often do, which is wrong. However, I guess, and this is something I would like to clarify with you. So at least most of the friends and most of the colleagues that we both know, they consider themselves Christians, whether they practice or not, let's leave that aside. But nonetheless, they consider themselves primarily as whites, and people of white origin, of white gene pool. So if I can put it more bluntly.
Right. I'm saying that they're related. They're related. I'm saying the evaporation of religious ethnic identity creates a vacuum, and white is what fills that vacuum. White is a sign of deracination. White means, what is a white guy? He's a Protestant, doesn't go to church anymore. That's pretty much what white guy means. And I'm saying that's all of Scandinavia right now. There are Protestants that don't go to church. As a result, there's this lack of ethnic identity, and it's now being filled by race. And I'm saying because of this, they are doomed to failure. This is playing right into the hands of your enemies, and St. Louis is the classic example. This man had to, in order to win the battle of the statue, he had to impose white identity on this group of Catholics, because as soon as you're white, you're a racist, and as soon as you're a racist, you have no rights. That's what happened. That's what got thwarted, and it got thwarted by showing the manipulation, the weaponization of race that was going on there. Again, Tom, we should have discussed this at length in Zagreb. Maybe Aleš will bring us back on again. But I got to get off. I've been on here for over
Michael, just before I sign off, first, please do accept my apologies. And in fact, I've been looking forward to meeting you and seeing you. In fact, I was very much delighted about this conference, a tentative conference, which unfortunately failed. And I guess I would certainly like to keep in touch, so probably Aleš can hook us up, sometimes in the near future. Secondly, please rest assured, mark my words, if you ever anticipate, hopefully with this COVID thing, whatever, if you anticipate coming over to Croatia and Slovenia, possibly we can organize something. I'd like to have you here. I'd like to have Jared Taylor, despite the fact that we all have differences, including my good friend Kevin McDonald. I'm sure you're familiar with Kevin McDonald.
Right.
Constantly in touch with him. And I would really love to have our discussion with you, Kevin McDonald, possibly with somebody else on this level, on this academic level. This is what we need in Eastern Europe and Central Europe badly. We need badly this type of stuff. I'll tell you, even Catholicism, the way you will let me finish with that, even the Catholicism I see here with the Medjugorje, stuff, and you don't know if we discussed about this hoax and so on. This stuff, it's so rampant. And I certainly would like to have somebody to back me up because, Catholicism, I have good friends, good colleagues, good people, top-notch folks, even folks born in America. But they seem to be, as we say in a Christian language, they sometimes tend to be more Catholic than the Pope, if you see what I mean. They follow the rules of the Vatican ukazes probably more persistently than the ukazes from Brussels. And there are so many things I'd like to discuss with you, and I have to sign off. Look, send me an email and possibly we'll keep in touch. And Aleš, you too, keep in touch. And try, Aleš, do me a favor. Just as much as I like this vicarious, what you call this virtual type of a discussion, I certainly prefer face-to-face meeting. And let me tell you, I'm not trying to flatter Michael. I'm not on his payroll, but he's a man of really staggering erudition. So, we can discuss about music, we can discuss about rock music, and he can we can talk about everything, and you can talk about Frank Zappa, Grateful Dead, whatever. I mean, the symphonies, and I certainly would love to have him more often. Except that, look, there are barriers here, and I'd like to overcome those barriers, technical barriers. And I'm a little bit upset with this COVID thing because 4 of my conferences have been canceled over the last couple of months, including the one you were supposed to be here. So I feel a little bit pissed. Sorry for the expression.
I agree with you. I am too.
Aleš, please do.
Thank you, gentlemen.
It's an honor, and please do keep me posted about your new books, and send me your address. I'll send you some of mine.
Okay.
I'll send you my novel. Titans Are in Town. I promise that. It's a pleasure, Mike. And send me also your email and your cell phone number. I'll call you back. Aleš, you take care. Thanks much.
Take care, Dr. Sunic. Take care, Dr. Jones. Thank you both gentlemen for accepting my invitation. I hope we'll see each other again soon. And I hope you and Dr. Sunic and other Weltstars from the so-called dissident right will meet in person very soon, perhaps in Zagreb.
Next year in Zagreb. Next year in Zagreb.
Dr. Jones, thank you. Have a pleasant day and see you soon.
Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.